A brilliant researcher discovers cosmic entities trying to corrupt humanity through ancient artifacts and sacrifices her sanity to sever their connection to Earth, inspiring a secret organization to continue the fight against otherworldly forces. The first time Meridian Clark heard the whispers, he was cataloging artifacts in the basement of the Ashford Institute for Anthropological Studies. The voice came from somewhere behind the rows of clay tablets, speaking in a language that predated human civilization by millennia. She paused, her latex-gloved fingers hovering over a carved obsidian figurine, and listened. The whispers stopped the moment she acknowledged them. Meridian had always been methodical. As the lead researcher at one of the country's most prestigious archaeological institutions, she approached every mystery with scientific precision. The whispers, she reasoned, were probably just the building's old ventilation system creating acoustic anomalies. She made a mental note to request maintenance and continued her work. But that night, alone in her apartment overlooking the university district, she dreamed of vast underwater cities and beings whose geometry defied human comprehension. With the taste of brine in her mouth and symbols burned into her memory, symbols that matched the ones carved into the obsidian figurine she'd been handling earlier. The next morning, Meridian arrived at the institute an hour early. She needed to examine that figurine more closely, but when she descended into the basement, she found something that made her blood run cold. The artifact was gone. In its place sat a note written in her own handwriting, though she had no memory of writing it. The sleepers stir, the harbingers walk among us. Trust no one who has seen the deep places. Meridian's hands trembled as she read the words. The handwriting was unmistakably hers, down to the slight leftward slant of her letters, and the way she crossed her T's, but she had no memory of writing it. None at all. She spent the morning combing through security footage, but the cameras in the basement had mysteriously malfunctioned during the night. The guards on duty claimed they'd seen nothing unusual. Dr. Harrison Webb, the institute's director, suggested she might be working too hard, perhaps hallucinating from stress and exhaustion. But Meridian knew what she'd seen. The figurine had been real. The whispers had been real. And somehow, impossibly, she'd written that note while unconscious that afternoon. She began researching the symbols from her dream. What she found in the institute's restricted archives chilled her to the bone. The symbols appeared in texts dating back thousands of years, scattered across different civilizations that had never had contact with each other. Ancient Sumerian tablets, medieval grimoires, Native American petroglyphs all contained variations of the same impossible geometry. The texts spoke of beings that existed outside human understanding, entities so alien that merely perceiving them could shatter a person's sanity. They were called by many names, the old ones, the deep dwellers, the sleepers beneath. But all the texts agreed on one thing: these beings were not gone. They were waiting, and they had servants. Research consumed her. She stopped eating regular meals, survived on coffee and whatever snacks she could find in the institute's vending machines. She barely slept, afraid of what she might dream, afraid of what she might do while unconscious. The whispers grew stronger, more insistent, speaking to her in languages that shouldn't exist. It was during one of these sleepless nights that she made her first real discovery. Hidden in the personal papers of Dr. Cornelius Blackwood, the institute's founder, she found a journal that changed everything. Blackwood had been investigating the same phenomena in 1923. He'd gathered a team of researchers, archaeologists, and linguists to study what he called the harbinger artifacts, objects that seemed to serve as conduits for otherworldly influence. But something had gone wrong. The team members began experiencing shared nightmares, blackouts, and episodes of automatic writing. One by one, they'd disappeared or been found dead in circumstances that defied explanation. The journal's final entry was dated October 31st, 1923. Blackwood wrote about discovering a chamber beneath the institute, a place where the barriers between dimensions grew thin. He'd found something down there, something that made him realize the full scope of the threat humanity faced. "They do not seek to destroy us," he wrote. "They seek to transform us, to make us willing servants in their cosmic design. The artifacts are not mere objects, they are seeds of corruption, planted in our world to prepare for their return. I have seen what we become when we surrender to their influence. I have seen the harbingers walk among us, wearing human faces, but serving inhuman masters." The journal ended abruptly there, but Meridian found architectural plans tucked between its pages. Plans for a hidden chamber deep beneath the institute, accessible through a concealed entrance in the basement. The same basement where she'd been working when the whispers first began. Meridian knew she should report her findings, should involve the proper authorities. But who would believe her? And, more importantly, who could she trust? If Blackwood was right, if the servants of these entities had infiltrated human society, then anyone could be compromised. She decided to investigate the hidden chamber alone. The entrance was exactly where Blackwood's plans indicated it would be, concealed behind a false wall that looked like solid stone. Meridian had to use a crowbar to pry it open, and when she did, a wave of stale air rushed out, carrying with it the smell of deep water and something else, something organic and wrong. The chamber beyond was carved from living rock, its walls covered in the same symbols that had haunted her dreams, but these were different somehow, more complex, as if they were part of a larger pattern that extended beyond what she could see. At the center of the chamber sat a pool of black water that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Standing at the edge of the pool, Meridian felt the whispers grow to a roar. The symbols on the walls began to glow with a sickly phosphorescence, and she realized with growing horror that the water in the pool was moving, not rippling moving. Something vast and purposeful stirred beneath its surface. That's when she saw them. The harbingers stood in the shadows at the chamber's edge, their forms shifting between human and something far more alien. They wore the faces of people she recognized: Dr. Webb, several of her colleagues, even the security guards who'd claimed to see nothing unusual. But their eyes held an intelligence that was ancient and utterly inhuman. "You have seen one of them," spoke its voice, a harmony of familiar tones twisted into something wrong. "You have understood. Join us willingly, and your transformation will be gentle. Resist, and you will break beneath the weight of cosmic truth." Meridian backed away from the pool, her mind reeling. Everything she'd believed about reality, about the nature of existence itself, was crumbling around her. The whispers were deafening now, promising power beyond imagination if she would only surrender, only accept her role in the grand design. But something deep within her refused to yield. Perhaps it was her scientific training, her lifelong commitment to seeking truth, no matter how uncomfortable. Perhaps it was simple human stubbornness, or perhaps it was something else entirely, a spark of defiance that the cosmic entities had not anticipated. "No," she said, her voice barely audible over the whispers. "I won't be your servant." The harbingers moved closer, their forms becoming more alien with each step. "You cannot comprehend what you refuse," they said in unison. "We offer transcendence. We offer purpose. We offer an end to the loneliness of limited existence." "I'll take loneliness over slavery," Meridian replied, surprised by the strength in her own voice. That's when she noticed something crucial. The symbols on the walls weren't just decorative, they were part of a binding circle, a mystical prison designed to contain whatever lurked in the black pool. And one of the symbols was damaged, its lines broken and incomplete. Blackwood hadn't just discovered this chamber, he'd sabotaged it, working with desperate speed. Meridian pulled out her phone and used its flashlight to examine the damaged symbol more closely. The pattern was complex, but she'd studied enough ancient texts to recognize the underlying structure. If she could complete the binding, she might be able to reinforce whatever barrier Blackwood had weakened. The harbingers realized what she was doing and surged forward, their human disguises finally dropping away to reveal their true forms. There were things of shadow and impossible angles, beings that hurt to look at directly. But Meridian forced herself to focus on the symbol, using her keys to scratch the missing lines into the stone. The moment she completed the pattern, the chamber exploded with light. The harbingers screamed a sound that seemed to come from dimensions beyond human perception. The black pool began to bubble and churn, and something vast and terrible rose from its depths. But the binding held. The completed symbol blazed with power, and the entity in the pool was forced back into the depths. The harbingers' forms began to waver, their connection to this reality severed. "This is not over," they hissed as they faded. "Others will come. Others will serve. You have delayed the inevitable, nothing more." Then they were gone, leaving Meridian alone in the chamber with the sealed pool and the weight of impossible knowledge. She climbed back to the Institute's basement, her mind struggling to process what she'd experienced. The obsidian figurine was back on its shelf, as if it had never been moved. The note in her handwriting was gone. Even the hidden entrance to the chamber had sealed itself, looking once again like solid stone. But the whispers remained, quieter now but still present, and Meridian knew that the harbingers had spoken the truth. This was not over. It would never be over. She spent the next weeks researching, learning, preparing. She found others like Blackwood throughout history, people who had encountered the cosmic entities and chosen to resist rather than serve. They'd left behind hidden knowledge, secret techniques for recognizing and fighting the harbingers. Most had died for their defiance, but some had managed to delay the inevitable return of the old ones. Meridian realized she was now part of that lineage. She was a guardian, a keeper of secrets, a warrior in a war that most of humanity didn't even know was being fought. The first test came 3 months later. Dr. Webb approached her with a new assignment. A recently discovered temple complex in Guatemala that showed signs of pre-Columbian contact with unknown civilizations. The symbols in the preliminary photographs were familiar variations of the same impossible geometry she'd seen in the chamber beneath the institute. "I'd like you to lead the expedition," Webb said, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. "Your expertise in pre-Columbian artifacts makes you the perfect choice." Meridian agreed, but she knew what she was really agreeing to. Webb was one of them now, a harbinger wearing a human face. The expedition would be a trap, an attempt to expose her to more of the cosmic entity's influence. But it was also an opportunity. She spent 2 weeks preparing, not just with research and equipment, but with mental exercises designed to strengthen her will against otherworldly influence. She practiced meditation techniques found in Black's journal, methods for maintaining sanity in the face of cosmic horror. She studied the binding symbols, learning to recognize their patterns and understand their purpose. The temple complex was located deep in the Guatemalan jungle, far from any modern settlement. The local guides refused to go within a mile of the site, claiming it was cursed. They spoke of strange lights in the jungle, of people who ventured too close and returned, changed. Meridian's team consisted of 6 people, including herself, and Webb. The others were graduate students and junior researchers, all eager to make their mark in the field. She watched them carefully, looking for signs of corruption, but they all seemed genuinely human. That worried her more than if they'd been obvious harbingers. It meant Webb was playing a deeper game. The temple itself was unlike anything in the archaeological record. It was built from a black stone that seemed to absorb light, its walls covered in the same symbols that had appeared in her dreams. But these were different again, more complex, as if they were part of an even larger pattern. The architecture defied conventional understanding, with impossible angles and chambers that seemed larger inside than outside. They made camp at the temple's entrance, and that night, the whispers returned with a vengeance. But this time, Meridian was ready for them. She used Blackwood's meditation techniques, centering her consciousness and building mental barriers against the alien influence. The whispers grew frustrated, angry, but they couldn't break through her defenses. The next morning, 2 of the graduate students were missing. Their tents were undisturbed, their equipment untouched, but they were simply gone. Webb suggested they might have gotten lost in the jungle, but Meridian knew better. They'd been taken, either by the harbingers or by something worse. The expedition should have been called off, but Webb insisted they continue. He was eager to explore the temple's lower levels, claiming that was where the most significant discoveries would be made. Meridian agreed, but she had her own reasons for wanting to go deeper. The temple's lower levels were a maze of corridors and chambers, each one more alien than the last. The symbols on the walls seemed to move when viewed peripherally, rearranging themselves into new configurations. The air grew thick and oppressive, carrying sounds that didn't quite register as sounds more like vibrations felt in the bones. It was in the deepest chamber that they found the altar. It was carved from the same black stone as the temple walls, but its surface was covered in a substance that looked like dried blood. Around its base lay dozens of artifacts, jade masks, golden figurines, obsidian knives, all bearing the same impossible symbols. But it was what sat on the altar itself that made Meridian's blood run cold. It was a book, bound in what looked like human skin and written in a script that hurt to look at directly. The moment she laid eyes on it, the whispers in her mind became a roar. The symbols on the walls began to glow, and she felt something vast and ancient stirring in the depths beneath the temple. "The Codex Umbra," Webb said, his voice filled with reverence. "We've been searching for it for centuries." That's when Meridian realized the truth. The expedition hadn't been a trap for her head, had been a retrieval mission. The harbingers had been looking for this book, this nexus of cosmic knowledge, and they'd used her expertise to find it. The remaining team members, all of them harbingers, now, she realized, began to chant in a language that predated human speech. The book on the altar began to glow with the same sickly phosphorescence she'd seen in the chamber beneath the institute. The temperature in the room dropped, and frost began to form on the walls despite the jungle heat outside. But Meridian had learned from her previous encounter. She'd studied the binding symbols, practiced the mental techniques, prepared for exactly this moment. While the Harbingers were focused on their ritual, she moved toward the altar. The book was the key, she realized. It was a conduit, a way for the cosmic entities to extend their influence into the human world. But it was also a weakness. If she could destroy it, or at least disrupt its function, she might be able to sever the connection. The chanting grew louder, more urgent. The symbols on the walls were blazing now, and cracks were appearing in the stone floor. Something was trying to break through from below, something that would make the entity in the pool beneath the Institute look like a minnow. Meridian reached the altar and placed her hands on the book. The moment she touched it, cosmic knowledge flooded her mind. She saw the true scope of the universe, the insignificance of human existence in the face of cosmic immensity. She saw the birth and death of stars, the rise and fall of civilizations, the endless cycle of creation and destruction that defined reality itself. But she also saw something else. She saw the fear that drove the cosmic entities, the desperate need for servants and worshippers. They were not gods, she realized. They were parasites, feeding on consciousness and will. They needed humanity not just as slaves, but as a source of sustenance, and that gave her power. Instead of trying to destroy the book, Meridian began to rewrite it. Using the knowledge flooding her mind, she started changing the symbols, altering their meaning, turning their power against their creators. The Harbingers realized what she was doing and surged toward her. But the book's power was protecting her now, creating a barrier they couldn't cross. The chanting became screaming as Meridian worked. The symbols on the walls began to change, their meaning inverting their power, turning inward. The cracks on the floor began to seal, and the presence trying to break through from below was forced back into the depths. But the cost was enormous. Each symbol she changed, each line she rewrote required a piece of her sanity. She felt her mind fracturing under the strain, her sense of self dissolving into the cosmic vastness. The whispers promised relief if she would only stop, only surrender, only accept her role in the grand design. "This is madness," Webb shouted over the chaos. "You're destroying everything." "Good," Meridian replied, her voice steady despite the agony tearing through her mind. "Some things need to be destroyed." The final symbol was the hardest. It was the key to everything, the linchpin that held the cosmic entities' influence together. Changing it would sever their connection to the human world, but it would also likely destroy her mind completely. She would become a raving lunatic, assuming she survived at all. But she thought of all the people who had been consumed by the entity's influence, all the civilizations that had fallen to their cosmic designs. She thought of Blackwood and the others who had died fighting this war. She thought of the graduate students who had been taken, the security guards who had been corrupted, the countless others who would suffer if she failed. And she changed the symbol. The world exploded into light and sound, an impossible sensation. The Harbingers screamed as their forms were torn apart, their connection to their cosmic masters severed. The temple shook as if struck by an earthquake, and cracks appeared in the walls. The book on the altar crumbled to dust, its power spent. When the chaos subsided, Meridian found herself alone in the ruins of the temple. The Harbingers were gone, banished back to whatever dimension they'd come from. The oppressive atmosphere had lifted, and for the first time in months, the whispers in her mind were silent. But the cost had been exactly what she'd expected. Her memories were fragmenting, her sense of self dissolving. She could feel her sanity slipping away, her mind unable to process the cosmic knowledge she'd absorbed. She had, perhaps hours before she became completely mad. She used that time to write, not in the alien script of the cosmic entities, but in plain English. Setting down everything she'd learned about the Harbingers and their masters, she wrote about the binding symbols, about the meditation techniques, about the artifacts that served as conduits for otherworldly influence. She wrote a guide for whoever would come after her, whoever would take up the fight when she was gone. The rescue team found her 3 days later, sitting in the ruins of the temple with a notebook filled with writing that seemed to shift and change when they weren't looking directly at it. She was catatonic, unresponsive to their questions, her eyes filled with a knowledge that was too vast for human comprehension. They brought her back to the United States, to a psychiatric facility, where she could receive proper care. The doctors diagnosed her with severe psychotic break, brought on by stress and isolation. They had no way of understanding what she'd really experienced, no framework for comprehending the cosmic war she'd fought. But the notebook survived. It found its way into the hands of Dr. Marcus Chen, a psychology professor who specialized in cases of mass delusion and shared psychosis. He'd been researching similar phenomena for years, trying to understand the psychological mechanisms that could cause entire groups of people to believe in impossible things. What he found in Meridian's notebook changed everything. The writing was coherent, despite her condition. It described a consistent mythology with internal logic and remarkable detail. More importantly, it matched other accounts he'd found in his research stories from across the globe, spanning centuries, all describing encounters with the same cosmic entities. Chen began to investigate. He found Blackwood's journal in the Institute's archives, discovered the sealed chamber beneath the building, traced the connections between various unexplained disappearances and bizarre incidents. The evidence was circumstantial but compelling, and it all pointed to the same conclusion. Meridian Clark hadn't suffered a psychotic break. She'd discovered a truth so vast and terrible that it had shattered her mind, but not before she'd managed to strike a blow against humanity's hidden enemies. Chen began to recruit others, people who had experienced similar encounters but hadn't been driven mad by them. They formed a small, secret network dedicated to watching for signs of the cosmic entity's influence, to standing guard against their return. They called themselves the Threshold Guard, and they used Meridian's notebook as their guide. They learned to recognize the symbols, to practice the meditation techniques, to identify the artifacts that served as conduits. They couldn't stop the cosmic entities permanently, that was beyond human power, but they could delay their return, disrupt their plans, save individual lives. Meridian remained in the psychiatric facility, lost in the vastness of cosmic knowledge, but sometimes, in her more lucid moments, she would smile. She could sense the work of the Threshold Guard, could feel the difference they were making. Her sacrifice had not been in vain. Years passed. The Threshold Guard grew, recruiting new members from among those who had encountered the cosmic entities, and survived with their sanity intact. They developed new techniques, discovered new ways to fight the otherworldly influence. They prevented several attempts to summon the cosmic entities back to Earth, disrupted Harbinger cults before they could gain significant power, but they always remembered that their victory was temporary. The cosmic entities were patient, eternal, and they would never stop trying to reclaim what they saw as their rightful domain. The war would continue, fought in shadows and silence, with humanity's sanity and, perhaps, its soul hanging in the balance. In her hospital room, Meridian Clark sat by the window looking out at the world she'd helped save. Her mind was fractured, her memories scattered, but deep inside, the core of who she was remained intact. She had faced the cosmic entities and refused to bow. She had seen the true nature of reality and chosen to fight for humanity's right to exist free from otherworldly influence. The whispers were gone now, replaced by something else, a quiet certainty that the fight would continue, that others would take up the burden she could no longer bear, and in that certainty, she found peace. The cosmic entities would return, they always did, but humanity would be ready for them, armed with knowledge and determination, and the unshakable belief that some things were worth fighting for, no matter the cost. In the end, that belief, that stubborn, illogical, utterly human refusal to surrender, had proven to be the greatest weapon of all, not because it could defeat the cosmic entities permanently, but because it could inspire others to keep fighting, generation after generation, until the end of time itself. The war between humanity and the cosmic entities would never truly end. But as long as there were people willing to stand against the darkness, willing to sacrifice their sanity for the greater good, humanity would endure, and in that endurance, there was victory enough.